Hey guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxation Channel. Tonight we step quietly into a medieval home on a bitter winter night, where the walls breathe cold air, the floor feels like stone even when it's actually packed. A newborn baby has arrived without central heating, thermal pajamas, or a suspiciously expensive nursery gadget promising 12 scientifically optimized sleep settings. You stand beside a tired mother as she holds the tiny child against her chest. Outside, frost gathers along the edges of wooden shutters. Inside, the fire settles into a red glow, and every little pocket of warmth matters. You probably won't survive this very comfortably if someone removes your modern duvet, but the baby beside you has never known anything else. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell everyone in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in a household where warmth begins not with an object, but with another person. The newborn is pressed close to the mother, and this simple arrangement is far more important than it might first appear. Medieval people do not possess thermometers capable of telling them that a newborn loses body heat rapidly. They do not speak about neonatal thermoregulation. Nobody announces that skin contact helps stabilise an infant's temperature while holding a parchment chart and looking professionally concerned. They simply know that a warm adult makes a cold baby warmer. The knowledge comes from experience. A mother feels the child's skin against her own. She notices whether the little hands seem unusually cold. She notices the strength of the cry, the movement of the limbs, and whether the baby settles when held close. Around her, older women have watched many births. Some are relatives, some are neighbours, others may act as midwives or experienced attendants. Their knowledge is practical rather than scientific. You watch the mother shift the child higher against her body. Her dress is loose enough around the chest to allow nursing, and the newborn remains tucked close while feeding. There's no deliberate modern method called skin-to-skin care, but physical closeness naturally happens again and again. Birth itself encourages this. After delivery, the newborn must be cleaned, inspected, wrapped, fed, and protected. Each task brings human hands near the child. The baby is rarely placed alone in a distant nursery because the medieval household does not really possess such a concept. A separate, beautifully decorated baby room would be a remarkable luxury. Most newborns remain where the people are, and where the people are, there is heat. You begin to understand that the mother herself functions almost like living household equipment, although describing her that way would probably get you thrown out of the village. Her body produces steady heat. Her clothing traps it. When the baby rests against her chest or stomach, some of that warmth reaches the infant. This matters especially because newborn babies have very little ability to control their own environment. An adult can stand up, move closer to the fire, pull on another garment, or complain dramatically about the weather. The baby has one strategy: cry until management responds, and management is extremely tired. The mother is also recovering from labour, so she's often resting somewhere comparatively sheltered. That alone can benefit the child. A household may contain drafts around doors, shutters, roof gaps, or badly sealed walls. The warmest position is usually not in the middle of an exposed room. It is near people, bedding, and the hearth. In wealthier homes, chambers may have curtains, wall hangings, or more substantial furniture that slightly reduce drafts. In poorer cottages, options are simpler. Yet even there, families understand the difference between a cold corner and a sheltered one. The baby stays within the household's warmest human zone. Breastfeeding strengthens this pattern. A newborn feeds frequently, both during daylight and through the night. You see the mother lift the child again and again. Every feeding means another period of close contact. The infant presses against warm clothing and warm skin. Breast milk also provides energy, and energy matters for maintaining body temperature. Medieval mothers do not calculate calories. Of course, nobody tells the baby that tonight's menu contains an excellent balance of fats and carbohydrates. The baby would probably leave a terrible review anyway, but the basic relationship between feeding and survival is unmistakable. A baby that feeds strongly is considered healthier than one that refuses to nurse. Women pay attention to this because they have seen how quickly a weak newborn can decline. The reality beneath the cosy picture is uncomfortable. Infant mortality in medieval Europe is high compared with modern societies. Newborns face infection, difficult births, premature delivery, malnutrition, and exposure to cold. Families cannot always save them. That makes warmth more than a matter of comfort. It becomes part of survival. You notice how the mother does not necessarily hold the infant continuously, every minute of the day. Medieval women have work to do, even soon after childbirth. Recovery customs vary according to region, wealth, religion, and social status. But household labour does not magically disappear because a baby has arrived. Someone must prepare food. Someone must tend the fire. Animals need attention. Clothing requires endless washing, drying, repairing, and complaining about how clothing requires endless washing, drying, and repairing. So the baby passes between trusted people. A grandmother takes the child. An older sister may hold the infant. A nurse or servant might help in a wealthy household. In some communities, neighbours appear after a birth, bringing assistance or simply inserting themselves into family business with the timeless confidence of people who believe they know exactly how everybody else should raise a child. Each transfer creates another source of body heat. The newborn moves from one warm torso to another instead of remaining isolated for long periods. This is one reason the medieval infant care can feel surprisingly communal. A baby belongs biologically to its parents, but everyday survival often involves a wider household network. You can imagine the scene during winter. The mother sits near the hearth with the baby tucked into her clothing. Someone stirs a pot. Someone repairs a shoe. An older child sleeps nearby. Smoke drifts upward, although medieval chimneys vary greatly in quality and availability. The house smells of wood smoke, wool, food, damp clothing, and people. A modern visitor might describe the air as slightly challenging. A medieval infant simply calls it home. One mainstream historical fact shapes everything you see. Most medieval European homes rely heavily on open fires or hearths for cooking and warmth. Fire is therefore central to domestic life, but the baby is not simply placed directly beside the flames. That would create obvious danger. Instead, warmth spreads outward through the room, while the infant remains close to adults who can monitor changes in temperature. Human contact becomes a safer buffer between the fragile baby and the unpredictable fire. You also encounter a curious belief circulating through medieval medical culture. Some physicians and writers inherit ideas from ancient Greek and Roman medicine about bodily qualities such as hot, cold, wet, and dry. Infants are sometimes described within these systems as naturally warm and moist creatures whose bodies require careful balance. This does not mean every village mother is discussing Galenic medicine while nursing at midnight. She's probably thinking something closer to, please stay asleep. Still, learned medical traditions influence how educated practitioners interpret infancy. A quirky detail appears in certain historical discussions of infant care. People sometimes worry not merely about cold air itself, but about drafts as dangerous forces capable of carrying illness or disturbing the body's balance. Closing shutters, hanging cloth, or repositioning a cradle can therefore feel medically sensible as well as comfortable. Historians still argue whether ordinary families consistently followed the detailed childcare advice preserved in medieval medical and religious texts. Written instructions mostly come from people who can write. That sounds obvious, but it creates a major problem. A physician describing ideal infant care may tell you what educated people believe should happen. He does not necessarily tell you what a farm worker's wife actually does at 3 in the morning during January. Daily life leaves fewer records. You reconstruct it through scattered evidence, household accounts, artwork, archaeology, medical writing, religious commentary, later traditions that may preserve older habits. And beneath all of these fragments sits basic human behaviour. A cold baby is picked up. You feel how instinctive that action is. The newborn makes a thin, unhappy sound. The mother lifts the child. She checks the face. She touches the cheek. She draws the baby inward beneath a fold of clothing. The crying slowly eases. Nothing about the moment requires written instructions. Her body supplies warmth immediately. There is also emotional comfort. Although medieval descriptions of parenting can sometimes mislead modern readers, older scholarship occasionally portrayed medieval parents as emotionally distant because so many children died young. That interpretation has been strongly challenged. Evidence from letters, religious practices, burial customs, prayers, and personal writing suggests that parents can experience intense attachment and grief. You do not need a modern parenting manual to love a newborn. You only need to watch the mother's hands. They move carefully around the child. The baby's head rests near her shoulder. Her breathing creates a steady rhythm. In a dark room, that rhythm becomes part of the warmth itself. The infant hears a heartbeat it already knows. You are looking at one of humanity's oldest heating systems. It needs no fuel delivery. It has no warranty, and it occasionally demands breakfast while simultaneously providing breakfast. As evening deepens, household activity gradually slows. The fire still matters, but the mother remains the closest and most reliable source of heat. Cold exists everywhere beyond her clothing, between door planks, across the floor, behind the shutter, under the roof. Yet within the small space between her body and the newborn, the temperature changes. The baby curls inward. Tiny fingers disappear against fabric. Breathing steadies. For now. Medieval winter remains outside that narrow circle of human warmth. You watch a pair of practiced hands transform a squirming newborn into something that resembles a very small parcel. First comes a soft layer of linen. The cloth is not especially thick, and by modern standards it may look too simple to provide serious protection from winter cold, yet the secret is not one enormous fluffy covering. The warmth comes from layers, close wrapping, trapped air, and the fact that the fabric sits snugly around nearly the entire body. The baby kicks once. A woman catches the tiny leg. Another kick follows. Apparently the medieval resistance movement has begun early. The cloth folds across the infant's torso, then around the legs. Long strips may be wound around the body to hold everything in place, depending on the time, place, wealth of the household, and local custom. The exact method varies considerably. This practice is swaddling. It is one of the most recognizable features of infant care in medieval Europe, appearing in written descriptions, religious artwork, and countless images of the infant Christ. You see it immediately in medieval paintings. A baby is often represented with arms held close and the entire body wrapped into a narrow shape. To modern eyes, the child sometimes looks less like a comfortable sleeper and more like an unusually sacred loaf of bread. Yet swaddling serves several practical purposes. It keeps clothing close to the infant. It makes the baby easier to carry. It reduces exposed skin. It can help retain warmth. And according to many medieval beliefs, it also helps the child's body grow properly. That last idea becomes important. Medieval medical thinking often treats the newborn body as soft, flexible, and unfinished. Adults may believe that an infant's limbs need gentle guidance so they develop straight rather than crooked. You therefore see swaddling discussed not merely as clothing, but as a kind of shaping. The arms may be positioned alongside the body, the legs may be extended, bands hold the posture. Parents and caregivers can interpret careful wrapping as responsible physical care. This is not unique to medieval Europe. Swaddling has existed in many societies across long periods of history. The medieval version belongs to a much larger human habit of wrapping newborns tightly enough to provide security and warmth. The materials, however, depend heavily on what a household owns. Linen is common for garments and household textiles where families can obtain it. It is made from flax, and producing good linen requires considerable labour. The fibres must be prepared, spun, woven, cut, and sewn. Nothing about cloth is disposable. That matters when you stand beside a medieval infant. There is no drawer full of inexpensive newborn outfits purchased in 3 cheerful colours because somebody could not decide whether sage green or dusty blue looked more peaceful. Every scrap has value. Old household linen may be reused. Worn adult garments can be cut down. Small pieces become infant cloths. A family with limited resources makes use of material until the material seems personally offended. Wool also plays an important role. Unlike linen, wool provides excellent insulation. Especially in colder conditions, it can appear as outer wrappings, clothing, bedding, or nearby layers that help preserve warmth. A baby might therefore have softer linen touching the skin while warmer wool surrounds the outside. You can feel the logic. Linen absorbs moisture and can be washed. Wool holds warmth. Together they create a system far more effective than leaving the infant loosely dressed. Of course, medieval wool does not necessarily feel like the smooth, carefully processed fabric you imagine from a modern shop. Some cloth is coarse, some is fine. Quality depends on wealth, region, sheep, processing, and purpose. A wealthy household may possess finely woven fabric and carefully prepared infant garments. A poorer family may rely on rougher cloth, old pieces, and whatever remains usable. The principle stays similar: layer, wrap, reduce exposure, keep the newborn contained. The small body disappears beneath fold after fold until only the head remains clearly visible. You notice that the wrapping itself changes how the infant loses heat. An uncovered baby has a large amount of skin exposed relative to its tiny body size. Wrapped fabric reduces contact with cold moving air. Multiple layers also hold small pockets of warmed air close to the skin. Nobody in the room explains insulation scientifically. They simply recognize that a wrapped child feels warmer. Practical knowledge often arrives long before scientific vocabulary catches up. The wrapping must not stay wet, though. This creates one of the less glamorous realities of medieval baby care. Newborns produce impressive quantities of laundry for creatures who contribute absolutely nothing toward household rent. There are no disposable diapers. Cloths must be changed. Soiled fabric must be removed. Wet layers can make the baby cold quickly, especially in winter. Caregivers therefore have strong reasons to check the wrappings regularly. You watch the infant being unbound. The process is slower than pulling off a modern onesie. Bands loosen, layers open. The baby suddenly discovers freedom and immediately waves both arms as if addressing Parliament. Fresh cloth replaces damp material. Then the careful wrapping begins again. Laundry becomes a constant problem. In cold weather, washing textiles is inconvenient and drying them can be difficult. Cloth may be placed near household heat, hung in sheltered spaces, or rotated so that some pieces remain available while others dry. A prosperous family owns more fabric and can manage this cycle more easily. A poor household has fewer choices. That difference can directly affect comfort. One mainstream historical fact is that swaddling appears frequently in medieval Christian imagery, particularly in scenes of the Nativity. Artists depict the infant Jesus wrapped tightly in bands or cloth, making the practice visually familiar across much of Christian Europe. These images do more than decorate churches. They reveal what audiences recognize. A swaddled baby looks normal, expected, properly cared for. The method carries cultural meaning as well as practical value. You may even notice that some medieval images make the swaddling bands look extraordinarily neat. Real babies rarely cooperate so beautifully. The painted infant lies calm and solemn. The actual infant beside you has somehow worked one hand free and is currently trying to punch the universe. There is another side to the practice. Tight wrapping can become too tight if the limbs are held rigidly for excessive periods. Modern medicine would raise concerns about healthy hip development and movement. Medieval caregivers do not understand these risks in modern anatomical terms. Ideas about the correct tightness therefore vary. Some medical writers warn against careless handling. Others emphasize straight positioning. Custom probably matters as much as formal advice. Historians still argue whether the very rigid swaddling shown in medieval art accurately represents everyday practice, or whether artists exaggerate the neat, bound appearance for symbolic and visual reasons. A painting freezes one moment. Daily care is messier. A mother may loosen bands. A nurse may rewrap them differently. An older relative may insist that the child needs to be tighter. Another may complain the child cannot possibly be comfortable. You can almost hear an argument that has survived every century. Everyone has an opinion about how to dress a baby. The materials themselves also carry surprising little histories. A strip of cloth may once have belonged to an adult shirt. A piece of wool could come from an older garment. Fine linen in a rich household may be specially prepared for an expected birth. Textiles circulate through families, changing purpose as they age. Nothing needs to begin life as baby equipment. This flexibility makes infant care possible even without specialized products. You begin to see why asking whether medieval babies have blankets can be slightly misleading. A single loose blanket is only one way to keep someone warm. A tightly layered wrapping can do much of the same work while staying attached to a moving child. It cannot be kicked away easily. It travels with the baby. It can fit inside another garment, basket, or cradle. It turns warmth into something wearable. A quirky detail appears in descriptions and images of swaddling bands themselves. Long, narrow strips can be crossed around the infant in patterns that look almost decorative. The result sometimes resembles careful lacing rather than simple wrapping. This neatness may communicate good household order. A properly wrapped baby reflects attentive care. An untidy one might suggest negligence, at least in moralizing imagination. Medieval culture frequently connects outward order with inward virtue. Apparently, even newborn packaging can become a character assessment. You run your fingers over a strip of linen. It's plain. There is no synthetic filling, no elastic, no waterproof layer, no label advising you to wash at 30 degrees and avoid tumble drying. Yet every property of the cloth matters. Its softness, its dryness, its thickness, its ability to fold smoothly without creating uncomfortable lumps against fragile skin. Caregivers learn these details through repetition. They know which piece is softer, which wool scratches, which linen has become thin, which band stretches, which cloth dries quickest near the heat. Domestic expertise lives in hands rather than manuals. That expertise is especially valuable when the temperature drops. A newborn cannot explain discomfort. The signals are indirect. Crying, restlessness, cold skin, unusual quietness. The adults interpret these signs with whatever knowledge experience has given them. If the child feels cold, another layer may appear. If the baby becomes sweaty or flushed, wrapping may be loosened. The goal is balance. Too little warmth is dangerous. Too much heat can also be uncomfortable. This makes swaddling something more active than simply tying up the infant and forgetting about it. The wrapping must be maintained, checked, changed, adjusted. You watch a caregiver slide 2 fingers beneath a band. She feels the pressure. She retightens one section and loosens another. The motion is quick because she has done it many times. The infant complains loudly during the entire procedure. Then the final fold closes across the chest. The little arms stop flailing. The legs disappear beneath layers. The crying becomes quieter. What remains is a small face emerging from a cocoon of ordinary household cloth. No single layer seems impressive. Together, they change the infant's immediate environment. Cold air reaches less skin. Warmth escapes more slowly. The baby becomes easier to carry without exposing the body each time someone moves across the room. And that may be the most practical quality of all. Warmth is no longer tied to one particular corner. The infant carries its own little shell of trapped heat, wherever human hands take it. Outside the wrappings, winter can continue behaving badly. Inside them, a tiny pocket of warmth survives. You step into the sleeping space and immediately discover that the medieval idea of a bed is not quite the private little island you expect. Privacy is expensive. Space is expensive. Heat is precious. So beds are often shared. A household may contain several people, but only a few proper sleeping places. Children sleep together. Servants may share beds. Travellers at inns can find themselves sleeping beside strangers. Husbands and wives share their sleeping space, and a newborn may spend much of the night within arm's reach of the mother or another caregiver. To your modern instincts, this sounds crowded. To a cold medieval household, crowded can be useful. Every sleeping body gives off heat. You climb beneath layers of bedding and feel how quickly the space changes. The air trapped around several people becomes noticeably warmer than the exposed room. Even when fire burns low, the enclosed sleeping area can preserve a small pocket of human heat. It is not elegant climate control, it is climate control with elbows. The bed itself may be one of the most valuable pieces of furniture in the household. In a prosperous home, it can include a wooden frame, mattress, sheets, coverings, curtains, and perhaps a canopy. In poorer settings, sleeping arrangements may be simpler, with straw mattresses, pallets, benches, sacks stuffed with plant material, or shared bedding laid wherever space allows. Yet wherever the family sleeps, the newborn does not necessarily occupy a lonely crib at the opposite end of the building. You see the baby positioned close to the adults who wake when it cries. That closeness is practical. A mother can feed without crossing a freezing room. A caregiver can reach over and check the infant. If the baby becomes restless, cold, or tangled in cloth, someone notices sooner than if the child sleeps far away. Nighttime becomes a sequence of small adjustments. A hand reaches out, a cloth is pulled into place, the infant is shifted slightly. Someone wakes, mutters something that would probably be recognizable to every exhausted parent in history, and then tries to return to sleep. The bedroom is rarely silent. Wood settles, wind pushes at shutters, someone snores, a baby squeaks, a dog may be nearby, and one unidentified person is apparently attempting to breathe through a blocked nose with the determination of a blacksmith operating bellows. You begin to understand why shared sleep is not merely a quaint custom. It is part of the household economy. Beds cost money. Textiles cost money. Rooms require construction and maintenance. Heating separate chambers would require even more fuel. A family that sleeps together uses fewer resources. Warmth is concentrated where it is needed. During the coldest months, that matters tremendously. The architecture also shapes sleeping habits. Many modest medieval homes consist of relatively few rooms. In some regions and periods, people cook, work, eat, and sleep within the same main space. Animals may even occupy an attached section of the building, particularly in rural households. The modern distinction between bedroom, nursery, living room, and kitchen becomes much less rigid. You do not walk down a hallway to check the baby monitor. There is no hallway. There is no monitor. There may barely be a separate room. The infant remains embedded within household life even during the night. In larger houses and castles, the situation changes, but not as completely as you might imagine. Wealthier people possess private chambers, yet sleeping alone is still far from universal. Noble women may have attendants nearby. Servants can sleep within or just outside chambers. Children have nurses and caregivers. A wealthy baby may occupy an impressive cradle and still spend the night surrounded by adults. More money can buy space. It does not automatically create isolation. Bed curtains add another layer of warmth. You pull one closed and immediately notice the difference. Heavy fabric surrounding a bed helps block drafts and traps warmer air generated by the sleepers. In grand households, curtains can be decorative, richly coloured, and expensive. Their practical value, however, is wonderfully simple. They make a smaller room inside the room. Cold air circulates outside. Warmer air lingers within. For a newborn nearby, this sheltered environment can be valuable. The same principle works with simpler hangings. Even ordinary cloth hung around a sleeping place can reduce direct drafts. A mainstream historical fact becomes obvious here. Medieval beds, particularly among the wealthy, often include curtains or textile hangings that provide privacy and help shield sleepers from drafts. The famous grand bed with curtains is not merely theatrical furniture designed so someone can dramatically announce bad news from beneath velvet. It solves real problems. Drafts are everywhere. Windows may have wooden shutters rather than glass. Walls are not always perfectly sealed. Doors open directly into cold spaces. Roofs permit air movement. Even stone buildings that appear solid can remain unpleasantly chilly. A fabric enclosure makes sleep more bearable. The baby benefits from this sheltered pocket without anyone needing to invent an electric heater. You settle deeper into the bedding. Mattresses vary widely. A prosperous household may use feather beds, sometimes layered over other mattresses. More ordinary families might sleep on sacks filled with straw, chaff, wool, hay, or other available materials. These fillings do more than soften the surface. They create insulation between the sleeper and the colder structure beneath. You notice the difference immediately when you imagine lying directly on a wooden bench or packed earth floor. Not appealing. The medieval spine already has enough problems. The sleeping surface raises or separates the body from cold ground and traps air inside the filling. For the newborn, direct contact with a cold surface can be avoided by keeping the child on layered bedding, in a small cradle beside the bed, or within reach of a sleeping caregiver. Exactly where the infant sleeps varies enormously. That uncertainty is important. Medieval households do not follow one universal bedtime manual. Custom changes by class, region, century, household size, and circumstance. Some infants sleep beside adults. Some use cradles. Some are placed in baskets or small beds close to the main sleeping area. Some move between these arrangements during a single night. Historians still argue whether bed sharing with infants was as widespread across medieval Europe as later sources sometimes suggest, because written warnings and moral instructions do not always tell you how frequently a practice actually occurs. The warnings themselves are revealing. Church and legal texts sometimes discuss the danger of adults accidentally overlaying infants while sleeping. That means the risk is known if a mother, wet nurse, or caregiver falls asleep beside a baby. A crowded bed can become dangerous. People are aware enough of accidental suffocation that religious authorities sometimes address it. You feel the uncomfortable tension. The same closeness that provides warmth and easy feeding can also create risk. A soft mattress, heavy covers, exhausted adults, and a tiny infant form a combination. Modern safety guidance would treat very cautiously. Medieval families do not have modern research on safe infant sleep. They make decisions inside the conditions available to them. On a freezing night, keeping the child nearby may seem entirely reasonable. The alternatives can also carry danger. A quirky tidbit appears in medieval discussions of nighttime accidents. Some church authorities become suspicious when parents claim that a baby has been accidentally smothered in bed. partly because proving exactly what happened during the night is almost impossible. Imagine being questioned about your sleeping position by a medieval cleric while already surviving life with a newborn. Not exactly the customer service experience anyone requests. Still, those records reveal something valuable. Infants do sleep near adults often enough for accidental overlaying to become a recognised social concern. The arrangement is therefore both comforting and hazardous. You watch the household prepare for sleep. Clothing may not be removed to the degree you expect. Depending on circumstances, people can keep some garments on for warmth. Nightwear exists in various forms among those who can afford it, but poor sleepers may simply use practical combinations of clothing and bedding. Caps can matter too. Adults sometimes wear nightcaps, and infants may have head coverings suitable to local custom. The head remains one of the few parts of a tightly wrapped baby consistently exposed to the air. A small cap helps reduce that exposure. Again, there is no grand technological breakthrough, just another thin layer placed where cold can reach. You move toward a humbler sleeping corner. Here there is no carved bed frame and no embroidered canopy. A straw-filled mattress lies on a low support. 2 children already occupy one side. An adult settles beside them. The newborn remains in a small basket close enough for someone to reach. The basket itself creates boundaries. It can prevent an older sleeper from rolling directly onto the child while keeping the baby close to the warmer sleeping group. This kind of practical compromise makes sense. Near enough for heat and attention, separate enough to create a little protection. Not every household can manage even that. Poverty strips away options quickly. One family may own good wool covering, another has worn cloth. One bed may have thick hangings. Another stands near a drafty wall. One infant lies on dry bedding. Another lives in a room where dampness seems to have become an unofficial family member. Wealth influences warmth at nearly every level. Yet people adapt. They move sleeping places seasonally. A bed might be shifted farther from a door. A pallet may be laid closer to the main hearth during severe weather. Curtains are closed. Shutters are fastened. Extra bodies gather under available coverings. Winter subtly rearranges domestic geography. The warmest space gains importance. You notice how nighttime creates its own little social map. The most vulnerable sleepers tend to remain where assistance is easiest. A newborn cannot get up and move, so the adults organise themselves around that limitation. A caregiver sleeps lightly. Another person wakes when the baby cries. Someone reaches out without fully opening their eyes. The entire household becomes a low-tech warning system. Not particularly cheerful one at 3 a.m, but functional. The shared bed also reveals how differently medieval people understand personal space. Modern sleepers may treasure a large mattress, individual pillows, precise room temperature, and strict negotiations about who stole the covers. Here, the covers belong to everyone. That produces its own diplomacy. Move too much and somebody complains. Pull too hard and a cold foot emerges. Roll toward the edge and you discover that medieval mattresses do not care about your ergonomic needs. Yet the newborn remains surrounded by warmth that would otherwise disappear into an empty room. The sleeping group functions like a small furnace. Each person contributes heat. The bedding traps it. Curtains or walls reduce air movement. Mattress filling insulates from below. The result is not warm by modern standards. Your nose may still feel cold. Your fingers may stay tucked beneath the covers. Morning clothing may feel horribly chilly when you put it on. But the difference between the open room and the sleeping space is real. Night deepens. The household fire dwindles until only faint red light remains. Nobody rushes to refill a thermostat. No machine hums to life. Instead, the bed holds what warmth the sleepers have created. Inside that crowded pocket of blankets, straw, cloth, breath, and restless limbs. The newborn remains close enough for a drowsy hand to find in the darkness. The room grows colder, the sleeping space does not surrender its warmth quite so quickly. You turn toward the hearth, and the entire room seems to turn with you. Fire is not merely another household feature here, it is the centre of cooking, light, work, conversation, and winter survival. The newborn may be tiny, but the family's decisions about where to place that baby are shaped constantly by the orange glow at the heart of the home. You feel the warmth most strongly when you stand close. Take 2 steps away, and it weakens. Take 5, and the room reminds you that medieval architecture has no interest in maintaining a pleasant 22 degrees. The baby cannot simply be placed directly beside the flames. Fire throws sparks, pots tip, smoke drifts, wood collapses unexpectedly as it burns. A crowded household contains children, animals, tools, cooking vessels, and adults carrying things through narrow spaces. Warmth is useful. Fire is not gentle. So you watch the family create distance carefully. A cradle or basket may stand near enough to benefit from the heat, but far enough to avoid sparks and accidental contact. The exact location changes according to the size of the room, the design of the hearth, the strength of the fire, and whatever else the household happens to be doing. During cooking, the area becomes especially busy. A pot hangs over the flames. Someone kneels to adjust fuel. Another person moves a stool. Steam rises. A child wanders too close and is immediately ordered away with a universal parental tone that requires no translation. The newborn remains out of the traffic. This is the first important lesson of hearthside warmth. The safest warm place is not necessarily the hottest place. The goal is steady comfort rather than roasting the infant like a very small festive goose. You notice that the fire itself changes through the day. Morning begins with rebuilding. Embers from the night may be coaxed back to life if they have survived. Dry material is added. Air reaches the coals. Small flames appear, followed by larger pieces of wood or other available fuel. Maintaining a fire requires effort. Fuel must be gathered, bought, cut, carried, stored, and kept reasonably dry. This makes warmth a resource. A wealthy household may burn substantial quantities of wood. A poorer family may conserve every stick. In regions where wood is scarce or expensive, people can use peat, brushwood, charcoal, agricultural waste, or other fuels depending on local conditions. Nothing about the fire is automatic. If you want warmth, somebody works for it, that somebody is often doing several other jobs at the same time. You see a woman feed a branch into the hearth while checking a cooking pot and listening for the baby's cry. Multitasking apparently predates email by quite a few centuries. The structure of the hearth varies enormously across medieval Europe. In some earlier and simpler houses, an open hearth may occupy a central position, with smoke escaping through openings in the roof or simply finding its way out through whatever gaps exist. In other houses, especially as architecture develops, fireplaces and chimneys become more common. A mainstream historical fact sits right in front of you. Chimneys spread gradually in medieval Europe, particularly in wealthier buildings and urban settings, but open hearths remain common for long periods. That difference matters for babies. A chimney can carry more smoke away from the occupied room. An open hearth allows much more smoke to linger. Warmth and air quality therefore become uncomfortable partners. You crouch near the fire and immediately understand the problem. The room feels warmer, but your eyes begin to sting. Smoke curls beneath the roof. The smell settles into clothing, hair, bedding, walls, and probably your entire personality. Modern fireplaces can seem cozy because modern houses are designed to control smoke. A medieval hearth may offer a more aggressive interpretation of atmosphere. The newborn breathes the same air. Nobody in the household understands particulate pollution in modern medical terms, but people certainly know that smoke irritates. They open doors, they use roof vents, they adjust fires. They may move the infant when the room becomes especially smoky. Still, winter creates a difficult choice. Opening the building clears smoke while admitting cold air. Closing it holds more warmth while trapping smoke. Domestic comfort becomes a negotiation between two unpleasant guests. You can almost imagine the household saying, "Cold may come in," but only if smoke leaves first. The fire also produces uneven heat. One side of your body feels warm, the other stays cold. This is why the position of a baby must be checked rather than assumed safe. A child placed near one side of a hearth could become too hot on the exposed side while the rest of the body remains cooler. Adults respond by moving cradles, turning baskets, adjusting coverings, or simply picking the baby up. The entire room is flexible. Furniture is not sacred. A stool shifts, a cradle shifts, people shift. Winter rearranges everything according to the fire. At night, the pattern changes again. Nobody wants to feed a roaring blaze continuously until morning if fuel is limited and everyone needs sleep. The fire is allowed to decline. Large flames shrink, embers glow, heat fades slowly. This is when families try to preserve warmth rather than create maximum heat. Ash may be drawn over embers to help them survive until morning. The technique conserves fire and makes rekindling easier. A quirky tidbit appears here. Keeping a household fire alive can be so important that borrowing embers or live coals from a neighbour is a perfectly practical solution when your own fire dies. You can imagine the embarrassment. You knock at the neighbouring door. "Good evening, lovely weather. Any chance you have some fire?" It is essentially the medieval version of asking for a phone charger, except considerably more important. Fire carries social meaning as well as practical value. A burning hearth signals an active household. It cooks food, it heats water, it provides light, it allows drying, it becomes the place around which domestic routines collect. For a newborn, this concentration of activity can be useful because caregivers are already nearby. The baby is not parked beside the flames like a decorative object. The infant remains within the area where adults spend much of their time. You watch wet cloth brought near the hearth. It must dry before reuse. Not too near. A careless spark could ruin precious textile. Too far away, and the dampness lingers. Someone hangs fabric where warm air can reach it. Another piece rests on a wooden support. This is part of infant warmth too. Dry cloth is essential. A damp wrapping draws heat from the baby much faster than a dry one. The fire therefore warms the infant indirectly by drying the materials used for care. The same applies to bedding. A cold, damp, sleeping surface is miserable. If conditions allow, cloth or padding may be aired near warmth before being used. You occasionally see caregivers warm a piece of fabric gently before placing it around an infant. The key word is gently. Anything placed directly against a newborn must not be dangerously hot. There is no precise temperature gauge. The caregiver uses touch. A hand checks the cloth. A cheek may be more sensitive than a palm. Experience becomes the measuring instrument. You realize how much medieval domestic safety depends on judgment. There are no warning labels, no thermostats, no smoke alarms, no appliance that turns itself off when forgotten. Fire must be watched. Children must be watched. Babies must be watched. And because human beings are human beings, sometimes somebody gets distracted by soup. Historians still argue whether many surviving written warnings about keeping infants away from hearths reflect frequent household accidents or simply the general caution expected in moral and medical advice. The evidence is incomplete. Everyday accidents often leave little trace unless they become legally or socially significant. Yet the danger is obvious enough that you do not need a court record to understand it. A cradle positioned too close to sparks is risky. Loose straw is flammable. Dry wood is flammable. Textiles are flammable. Half the household seems capable of catching fire if you look at it suspiciously. Caregivers, therefore, balance proximity carefully. The warm zone around the hearth becomes more useful than the hearth itself. You can picture invisible rings spreading outward. Closest is the dangerous zone of flame. sparks, hot iron, and boiling pots. Beyond that is a working zone where adults cook and tend fuel. Farther out lies the comfortable zone where a baby can benefit from warmth without entering the chaos. The exact boundaries constantly move as the fire grows or fades. Weather also changes them. On a mild day, the cradle can sit farther away. During severe cold, everyone gathers inward. The baby's place follows the household's judgment. You also notice that different rooms hold heat differently. A stone castle may sound luxurious, but stone can remain brutally cold. Large halls are difficult to heat. A roaring fireplace warms the area immediately in front of it, not the entire enormous chamber. A wealthy infant, therefore, does not automatically live in tropical comfort. Money helps provide fuel, textiles, servants, and enclosed chambers. But medieval heating remains local. Even royalty cannot order the laws of physics to leave the room. Smaller spaces can sometimes feel warmer because body heat and fire are concentrated. A modest cottage with a functioning hearth may become smoky and cramped, yet the area close to the fire can be surprisingly warm. This is why size does not equal comfort. The grand hall impresses visitors. The small chamber keeps your toes happier. As evening settles, the hearth becomes the household clock. Its brightness tells you how much activity remains. Strong flames accompany cooking and work. Lower fire means quiet. Embers suggest sleep. The newborn passes through these stages without understanding any of them. The baby only responds to sensation. Warm enough, too cold, hungry, wet, tired, unhappy for reasons no adult will ever successfully identify. A caregiver picks up the child and moves a little closer to the remaining heat, not directly into it, just close enough. The baby's face catches faint orange light. Shadows move across the walls. A log cracks softly. Someone nudges it inward with an iron tool. The fire settles again. Around it, the household grows still. The warmth will not last forever, but for now it spreads through drying cloth, warmed air, nearby bedding, and careful human choices. The hearth does not wrap the newborn. It changes the small world around the newborn, one glowing ember at a time. You run your fingers across a heap of household textiles and discover that almost nothing here exists for only one purpose. A length of wool may begin as a cloak. Years later, a worn part becomes a smaller wrap. A damaged section gets cut away. A surviving piece turns into padding. Even the scraps may eventually find work inside a mattress, beneath a sleeping child, around a basket, or stuffed into some chilly gap where moving air has become irritating. Medieval families live in a world where cloth requires enormous labour. Sheep must be raised. Flax must be grown. Fibres must be cleaned and prepared. Spinning consumes hours. Weaving consumes more. Dyeing adds expense. Tailoring requires skill. By the time fabric reaches your hands, it represents far more work than a modern person usually imagines while throwing an old t-shirt into a donation bag. Nothing gets dismissed casually, especially not wool. You lift a thick piece and immediately understand its usefulness. Wool traps air between its fibres, and those little pockets of air slow the loss of heat. Even when the fabric is not particularly beautiful, it can be remarkably useful in cold weather. For adults, wool becomes cloaks, tunics, stockings, hoods, and coverings. For a newborn, it can become an outer layer, a padded surface, an additional wrap, or a barrier between the child and a colder sleeping place. The baby does not need a product labelled infant winter blanket. The household already possesses warmth in other forms. A woman folds an old wool garment into a cradle. The sleeves are no longer useful as sleeves. The body of the garment has worn thin in places, but folded several times. It creates a soft insulating layer beneath the infant. This is the medieval talent for improvisation. You stop asking, what is this object supposed to be? You begin asking, what can this object still do? That change in thinking? explains a great deal. A damaged cloak can still block a draft. A worn skirt can still provide cloth. A piece of old linen can become a cleaning cloth. A scrap of wool can become padding. There is little distinction between recycling, thrift, and ordinary common sense. You see it everywhere. Even wealthy households reuse textiles. Fine fabric is expensive enough that garments may be altered, passed down, dismantled, or repurposed. Household inventories sometimes treat textiles as valuable property rather than disposable background objects. A mainstream historical fact sits quietly in the pile before you. Cloth is one of the most labour-intensive and valuable categories of everyday material in medieval Europe, and garments are commonly repaired and reused for long periods. This shapes infant care directly. The newborn receives materials with histories. Perhaps the linen once belongs to the child's father. Perhaps the wool comes from an older sibling's garment. Perhaps the padding beneath the baby has already survived 2 winters and an uncle who apparently sits on everything. You cannot know, but objects move through households. A newborn enters a world already full of used things. That does not necessarily mean dirty or neglected. A reused textile can be washed, aired, dried, folded, and carefully maintained. Caregivers judge it by condition. Is it dry? Is it soft enough? Does it have rough seams? Are there holes? Does it smell damp? Can it be placed against skin? Or should it remain as an outer layer? The answers determine where each piece goes. Linen behaves differently from wool. You feel it between your fingers. It is smoother when well prepared, often lighter, and useful for the layers that need frequent washing. Wool is harder to clean repeatedly and can be unpleasant against delicate skin if coarse. So materials acquire different jobs. The softer cloth stays nearer the baby. The warmer, heavier cloth stays farther out. Not every household follows precisely the same arrangement. But the logic is easy to understand. Comfort close to the skin, insulation around it. You then notice something less textile-like lying beneath a small sleeping basket, a sheepskin. Now the room becomes interesting. Sheep provide far more than meat and wool. Their skins can be processed into leather or preserved with fleece attached, depending on local techniques and intended use. A fleece-covered skin creates a naturally insulating surface. Placed beneath bedding, it separates the body from colder boards or floors. Used nearby, it adds another layer of trapped air. The infant does not need to be wrapped directly in fur for the material to help. Insulation underneath matters too. You press your palm onto the fleece. The surface feels warmer than bare wood almost immediately. That is partly because wood and stone draw heat away differently, and partly because the fleece keeps your skin from making direct contact with the colder structure below. The principle is simple enough for anybody to discover without equations. Sit on bare stone in winter, then sit on wool. Congratulations. You have completed medieval experimental physics. Fur and animal skins are especially useful in colder regions and among people who have access to them. Their availability depends on wealth, environment, trade, hunting rights, livestock, and local fashion. A prosperous household may possess expensive furs associated with status. A humbler family is more likely to use practical skins from familiar animals when available. The difference between luxury fur and ordinary insulation can be enormous. Ermine on a noble robe announces rank. A sheep fleece under a sleeping child announces that somebody prefers the child not to freeze. Medieval society manages to make even hairiness socially complicated. You explore another pile. There are pieces too small to become garments. These are not automatically worthless. Scraps can be layered. They can fill gaps in bedding. They can be placed beneath a basket. They can protect the sides of a cradle. They can cushion a hard edge. Several thin pieces together accomplish what no single scrap could do alone. This matters for poor households. Poverty does not eliminate practical knowledge. In fact, limited resources often make improvisation more important. A family with little spare cloth learns exactly which pieces retain warmth best. They know which garment can sacrifice another patch. They know what can be borrowed. They know which relative has spare wool. They know whether a neighbour might trade cloth for food, labour, eggs, or some future favour that everyone will remember with suspicious precision. You begin to see warmth as a network of materials rather than a single item. The floor contributes cold. So something goes underneath. Drafts creep through gaps. So something gets hung or stuffed nearby. The infant loses heat through exposed surfaces, so cloth covers them. A hard basket wall feels chilly, and so padding softens it. No individual solution is dramatic. Together, they create a protected little environment. A quirky tidbit emerges when you examine the life of old clothing. Medieval garments can be altered so thoroughly that a valuable piece of cloth may pass through several forms before disappearing from recognizable use. A cloak becomes a smaller cloak, then part of it becomes a child's garment, then a surviving panel becomes a household cloth. Eventually, the final scraps may serve as stuffing or patches. The cloth has a longer career than most politicians, and considerably fewer speeches. You hold up one faded piece and wonder how many bodies it has already warmed. Textile archaeology sometimes reveals repeated stitching, patching, cutting, and repair. Reminders that fabric can remain useful long after its first design disappears. For a newborn, that history is invisible. The baby experiences only temperature and texture: warm, scratchy, dry, wet, soft, uncomfortable. The adults translate these reactions into adjustments. A rough wool edge gets folded away. A softer piece goes beneath the head. A damp layer is removed. A cold basket gains extra padding. Nothing requires the child to possess a complete matching set. Matching sets are for households with suspicious amounts of free time. Practical combinations dominate. Colour hardly matters in the dark. A brown piece of wool works beside undyed linen. A faded red scrap can sit beneath a cream-coloured wrap. The medieval infant is not judging the nursery aesthetic. The infant is judging whether existence has become slightly less chilly. You also notice plant materials entering the system. Straw, hay, dried grasses, rushes, and chaff may serve as stuffing or floor covering depending on region and household. These materials are cheap compared with woven textiles. A sack filled with straw creates a barrier between a body and a cold surface. A basket lined with dry plant matter and then covered with cloth can provide cushioning and insulation. The important word is dry. Damp straw becomes unpleasant quickly. It loses much of its comforting quality, develops odours, and can encourage insects or mould, so bedding must be checked and replaced. A medieval household does not simply make an infant bed once and admire it for 6 months. Materials wear out, they flatten, they absorb moisture, they collect dirt, they need changing. Care is continuous. You catch sight of dried herbs tucked among household materials. Now you enter the uncertain edge between comfort, cleanliness, scent, and belief. Aromatic plants are sometimes used in bedding or domestic spaces. Their smell can mask less pleasant odours, and people may attribute protective or medicinal qualities to certain herbs. Exactly how often herbs appear in infant bedding is difficult to establish. Historians still argue whether references to scented or medicinal bedding describe widespread everyday practice, or mostly reflect wealthier households, medical recommendations, and idealised domestic customs. You can imagine why the idea appeals. A little lavender or another pleasant plant smells better than old straw. Whether it performs all the health-giving miracles someone claims is another matter. Medieval medicine has a generous relationship with confidence. You inspect the construction of a modest baby sleeping place. A woven basket forms the outer shape. A layer of dry plant material fills the bottom. A folded textile lies over it. A softer cloth covers that. Another piece can be tucked around the infant without being loose enough to drift everywhere. No factory has produced any of these components as a coordinated system, yet the result is recognisably thoughtful. softness where needed, warmth where needed, structure around the child, insulation below, replaceable materials in places likely to become dirty. It is less a product than a household invention, assembled from whatever is available. That makes every infant's arrangement slightly different. In a fishing community, rope fibres, sailcloth scraps, or traded textiles may enter domestic reuse. In sheep-raising country, wool is easier to obtain. In towns, markets provide access to second-hand garments and textile remnants. In elite homes, servants manage larger stores of linen, wool, fur, and bedding. Geography quietly enters the cradle. So does social class. The poorest family faces harder choices. When there is not enough good fabric for everyone, adults may prioritise the smallest child, or they may simply have nothing extra to give. A mother can know exactly what would help and still lack it. That distinction matters. Medieval hardship is not always a failure of knowledge. Sometimes it is a failure of resources. You feel the weight of that reality while holding a thin-worn cloth. No amount of clever folding turns one layer into four. Improvisation stretches resources. It cannot create them from nothing. Still, people use astonishing creativity with what they possess. A torn garment becomes a wind barrier. A fleece becomes a warm base. A straw sack becomes a mattress. Linen scraps become washable layers. Wool remnants become insulation. The ordinary contents of the house form a protective shell around its newest member. As the room grows colder, someone checks the infant's little nest. A corner of wool gets tucked closer to the basket wall. A piece beneath the baby is smoothed flat. The surface stays dry. The roughest material remains safely underneath. The softest stays near the skin. Nothing matches. Nothing carries a label. Nothing has been purchased as a complete solution. Yet the arrangement works through accumulation. One humble layer, then another, then another. Around the newborn, the household's old garments, animal fibres, plant materials, and careful hands quietly become something close to a blanket without ever needing to be one. You crouch beside a small wooden cradle and notice something easy to overlook. It's not sitting directly on the coldest part of the floor. That matters. A medieval floor can be packed earth, stone, timber, or a mixture of materials depending on the house, region, and wealth of the family. None of these surfaces are particularly interested in keeping a newborn comfortable during winter. Stone holds cold stubbornly. Packed earth can feel damp. Wooden boards are better, but gaps between them may allow drafts from below. So families try to keep the infant slightly separated from the surface beneath. The cradle does much more than stop a baby from rolling away. It creates distance. Even a few inches can change the immediate environment around the child. You reach beneath the cradle and feel cooler air near the floor. Cold air tends to settle lower in a room, especially when warm air gathers nearer the hearth or around occupied spaces. The difference may not be dramatic, but for a small body, small differences matter. The cradle becomes a raised island, not a tropical island, more of a mildly less unpleasant medieval island. Its wooden sides also provide a boundary against drafts. A basket can do something similar. You see a woven one placed on a bench rather than directly on the floor. Its curved sides create a sheltered pocket, especially once the bottom and edges are lined with dry material. Inside, the baby rests above layers of padding. Outside, the room remains chilly. This little separation is part of the design. A mainstream historical fact is that cradles appear frequently in medieval European art and household descriptions, especially in scenes involving infants, domestic interiors, and religious imagery. Some are simple wooden boxes, some rest on curved rockers, some are suspended, some resemble baskets. Some are elaborate enough to show the wealth of the family that owns them. The form varies, but the purpose remains recognizable. Keep the baby contained, keep the baby accessible, Keep the baby away from some of the hazards of the floor. You move your hand over a cradle built on curved runners. A gentle push sends it rocking. Back, forward, back, forward. The motion is slow enough to become almost hypnotic. Rocking solves several problems at once. It can soothe the infant. It can help the baby settle without being constantly carried. And because the cradle itself stays raised, the child does not need to be placed on a pallet every time the caregiver's arms need a rest. That matters in a household where everyone is busy. The mother may be spinning, someone is preparing food, someone is mending a tool, another person is trying to keep a curious toddler from treating the fire as a personal experiment. The cradle gives the baby a defined place within the activity. You notice another design. This one hangs slightly above the ground. It may be suspended from a frame, rope, or support depending on local practice. The suspended cradle can be nudged with a hand or foot. That means a caregiver can continue working while keeping the baby moving. You sit down and imitate the rhythm. Your foot touches the cradle. It swings. Your hands remain free. This is domestic efficiency in its purest form. No batteries, no music settings, no Bluetooth connection that inexplicably needs updating at midnight. Just gravity. Suspended cradles have another advantage. They put more distance between the baby and a dirty floor. Medieval floors are working surfaces. Mud comes in on shoes, ash falls, food drops. Animals may wander nearby. Rushes, straw, dust, and scraps collect underfoot. A newborn lying directly in that environment would be inconvenient at best. A cradle lifts the child above the traffic. It also reduces accidental contact with feet. That sounds obvious until you look at how crowded the room is. People move constantly around furniture, baskets, tools, and one another. The baby needs a protected zone. A wooden sidewall offers some protection from a careless step, a wandering chicken, or an older sibling who has recently discovered the exciting scientific principle of poking things. You inspect the cradle's position. It does not simply stay in one place all year. A family can move it. During winter, it may be placed in a more sheltered section of the room. During warmer weather, it can shift somewhere with more ventilation. The cradle is mobile climate management. Not sophisticated climate management, but useful. You watch two adults lift it carefully. The baby remains inside. They carry the entire arrangement away from a drafty doorway and set it closer to an interior wall. That movement takes seconds. The infant's microclimate improves without altering the building. Medieval houses encourage this kind of adaptation. You cannot seal every crack. You cannot insulate every wall. You cannot install underfloor heating. You move the baby. Sometimes the simplest technology is rearranging furniture. The floor itself explains much of this behaviour. In rural homes, packed earth floors can absorb moisture from the ground and household activity. In stone buildings, cold rises unpleasantly through any bedding laid directly on the surface. Wooden floors are not automatically warm either, especially in upper chambers exposed to air below or in poorly sealed structures. So distance becomes insulation. You place a folded cloth on the floor and press your palm against it. Then you place the same cloth inside the raised cradle. The second position feels less exposed. The material is identical. The environment is not. This is why furniture matters as much as fabric. You can own perfectly decent cloth and still lose warmth quickly if the infant is laid directly against something cold. A cradle turns the baby into a small, elevated passenger rather than floor cargo, and medieval babies have enough indignities already. You notice that not every infant has a beautifully carved cradle. Poorer households improvise. A sturdy basket works. A wooden trough-like container may be adapted. A box can be padded. A shallow woven carrier can become a sleeping place. The important qualities are stability, dryness, and protection. No one needs an official manufacturer to declare the object suitable for babies. Households judge with experience. Does it tip? Is the bottom rough? Can the baby roll against a hard edge? Does cold air pass through it? Can it be lined? Can it be moved? The answers determine whether the object is useful. This flexibility creates some wonderfully odd possibilities. A quirky tidbit from historical domestic life is that containers not originally designed as dedicated infant furniture could sometimes be repurposed for childcare. A basket used for household carrying might suddenly become a baby bed. The medieval nursery department is basically the rest of the house viewed with imagination. You glance around and begin seeing potential cradles everywhere. That basket, that shallow chest, that wooden frame. Perhaps not the bucket. You have standards. The cradle's height also affects supervision. If the baby is raised enough, an adult can check the child without kneeling on the floor every few minutes. A low cradle beside a stool allows a seated caregiver to reach in easily. A hanging cradle can be rocked while the adult works nearby. A basket placed on a bench brings the infant into the same visual level as household activity. This accessibility matters because warmth must be judged repeatedly. The caregiver touches the baby's neck or face, checks whether cloth remains dry, feels whether the hands seem cold, adjusts the position. No thermometer appears. No sensor sends an alert. The cradle helps by keeping the infant close enough for these checks. It is not merely furniture, it is part of the monitoring system. You watch a woman reposition the padding at the bottom. The material has flattened on one side. She lifts it, shakes it, spreads it evenly. The baby's sleeping surface becomes thicker again. Flattened stuffing insulates less effectively than material containing pockets of air. Nobody explains this scientifically. They only know the bed feels better when refreshed. The same instinct drives people to fluff straw mattresses, shake wool, and replace compressed plant filling. Comfort teaches physics quietly. You also notice that cradles sometimes have canopies, cloth drapes, or coverings positioned around them, especially in wealthier households. These can block moving air. A light curtain over part of the cradle may reduce drafts without sealing the infant completely inside. But here the balance becomes delicate. Too enclosed, and air movement decreases too much. Too exposed, and cold air reaches the child. Caregivers judge by feel and custom. Historians still argue whether cradle coverings shown in some medieval images represent typical daily practice, ceremonial display, artistic convention, or a mixture of all three. Artwork can make infant furniture look beautifully organized. Real households are rarely so obedient. The cradle in front of you currently contains one loose corner of cloth, a bit of crushed straw, and a baby who appears determined to rotate 90 degrees through pure spite. Reality has entered the composition. You look more closely at the rockers. The curves permit movement, but they also create risk if the cradle is pushed too hard. A strong shove could make the baby roll or the cradle shift unexpectedly. Older children might treat it as entertainment. Adults therefore supervise. Some cradles can be steadied or blocked when rocking is not wanted. Practical furniture always comes with practical warnings, even if nobody writes them down. The baby sleeps. The room does not stop. People step around the cradle. A dog notices the floor nearby. Someone carries a basket of fuel. Another person shakes out a cloth. The raised sides create a little boundary between the newborn and all this movement. You begin to understand that keeping a baby warm also means keeping the baby out of places where warmth disappears quickly. Away from bare stone. Away from damp ground. Away from the draft under a door. Away from the coldest corner. Elevation is part of warmth. Position is part of warmth. Furniture is part of warmth. The cradle gathers these ideas into one object. Then there is the question of portability. A basket can travel from one room to another. A small cradle can be moved closer to household activity. In a larger home, a nurse can reposition the infant according to where people are working. In a modest cottage, Moving only a few feet may be enough to escape a cold current of air. You watch the cradle shift again as evening temperatures fall. Its new position is not dramatic. It simply sits where the floor is drier and the air feels calmer. That is the entire strategy. Avoid the worst cold. Preserve whatever warmth already exists. Create a small protected space. As the baby settles deeper into sleep, the cradle barely rocks. The wooden frame creaks softly. The floor beneath remains cold. You can feel that chill through your shoes, but the infant is not lying on it. The little body rests above layers of dry padding, held inside wooden or woven walls, separated from the hardest, coldest surface in the room. A few inches of height do not look heroic. They do not need to. For a newborn in a medieval winter, even a few inches can be useful shelter. You hear the newborn stir long before the crying becomes serious. A tiny mouth opens, the head turns, the hands flex. Then comes the unmistakable complaint of a creature who has decided that several minutes without food is an unacceptable administrative failure. The mother lifts the baby and begins to feed. This repeated act does more than satisfy hunger. Food helps create heat. A newborn needs energy simply to stay alive, and part of that energy is spent maintaining body temperature. In a cold medieval home, feeding becomes one of the quiet foundations of warmth. Nobody in the room uses the language of metabolism. Nobody calculates how many calories the baby needs per kilogram. There is no chart on the wall explaining brown fat, glucose use, or thermogenesis. The household simply recognizes a basic pattern. A baby that feeds well usually seems stronger. A baby that does not feed is worrying. You watch closely. The infant nurses, pauses, breathes, and begins again. The rhythm is slow. Milk enters the stomach. The small body receives fuel. That fuel supports growth, movement, circulation, and the constant invisible work of keeping tissues warm. This is one reason newborn feeding happens so frequently. Their stomachs are small, their needs are large. They cannot eat a huge meal and then politely schedule the next 8 hours later. That would be far too convenient. Instead, the baby wakes repeatedly. Daylight, evening, middle of the night. Just when every adult finally becomes comfortable, a medieval newborn displays impressive commitment to destroying sleep routines centuries before anyone invents parenting forums. The frequent waking has an unintended warming effect. Each feeding interrupts long periods of stillness. The baby is lifted, repositioned, touched, checked, held near a warm adult. Fresh layers can be adjusted while the infant is awake. A damp cloth may be noticed. A cold cheek may attract attention. The cycle of feeding becomes a cycle of monitoring. The household does not need a scheduled temperature check because the infant creates repeated opportunities for inspection. You see the mother place her fingers against the baby's back. Warm enough. She touches the neck, not sweaty. She notices that one foot has somehow escaped its covering. Naturally, that gets tucked in, then feeding resumes. This combination of nutrition and handling matters most during the fragile first days. A newborn may become sleepy and difficult to feed. That can be dangerous. Weak babies sometimes struggle to nurse effectively, and if they take in too little milk, they may become weaker still. Cold can make the problem worse because a chilled infant may have less energy for feeding. Poor feeding then leaves the baby with less fuel to produce heat. You can see how easily a difficult cycle begins. Cold, weakness, poor feeding, more cold. Medieval caregivers do not describe this as a metabolic spiral, but they can observe the practical signs. The baby feels cool, the suck is weak, the cry is faint, the child sleeps too deeply. Experienced women pay attention. They may try to wake the infant gently for feeding. They may reposition the child. They may rub the limbs. They may warm the surrounding cloth. They may encourage repeated attempts to nurse. Knowledge travels through households in the form of instructions that sound simple because generations have tested them. Try again. Hold the baby differently. Keep the child warm. See whether the baby swallows. Watch the colour of the face. No university degree is required to notice that a feeding infant often becomes calmer and warmer. A mainstream historical fact shapes this entire scene. Breastfeeding is the normal and most important form of infant feeding in medieval Europe, particularly during the earliest months of life. For most families, the mother nurses her own child if she is able. In wealthier households, especially among elites, a wet nurse may sometimes take over part or all of the breastfeeding. That creates a fascinating social arrangement. A wet nurse is not simply a servant who happens to carry milk. She can become one of the most physically important people in an infant's life. The baby spends hours in her arms, feeds from her body, sleeps near her, depends on her health and diet. Her presence links nutrition, warmth, comfort, and social status in a remarkably intimate way. You enter a noble household and the difference becomes visible. The biological mother may be recovering separately while a carefully chosen nurse feeds the newborn. Families can take the selection seriously. People may consider the nurse's health, age, temperament, appearance, diet, and moral character. This last concern comes from old medical and cultural beliefs that qualities of the nurse might somehow pass to the infant through milk. Apparently, medieval milk is expected to carry personality traits along with breakfast. One badly behaved nurse, and everyone worries the baby may grow up with opinions. Medical writers inherit theories stretching back to antiquity about how milk is formed and what affects its quality. Diet matters. Emotions may be thought to matter. Sexual activity may be thought to matter. The nurse's bodily balance matters. The result is a huge collection of recommendations, some practical and some wonderfully speculative. A quirky tidbit appears in this advice. Certain writers suggest evaluating a wet nurse's milk by examining its colour, smell, consistency, or even how a drop behaves on a smooth surface. You can imagine the medieval quality control department leaning over a dish with grave concentration. The milk spreads too quickly. Suspicious. The milk seems thick. Also suspicious. The baby, meanwhile, has the radical proposal of simply drinking it. Not every family can hire a wet nurse. Among ordinary households, nursing usually stays within the family. If the mother dies, becomes ill, or cannot produce enough milk, relatives and neighbours may become crucial. Another lactating woman might nurse the child. This is one of the most important forms of community support available to a newborn. Milk cannot be stored safely for long without modern refrigeration. Artificial feeding is far more dangerous than it is today. Animal milk may be used in difficult circumstances, but it creates problems. It differs nutritionally from human milk. Containers can be contaminated. Milk spoils. Feeding devices are difficult to keep clean. That makes access to a lactating woman extremely valuable. You watch a neighbour take the child. There is no dramatic ceremony. The baby simply feeds. A practical solution appears because another woman happens to have milk. Communities survive partly through these exchanges of bodily labour. One household helps another. A woman nurses a relative's infant. A wet nurse may feed multiple children. Milk relationships can even acquire social and religious significance in some places, creating ideas of milk kinship or special bonds between children who share a nurse. The newborn knows none of this. The baby cares only that the food is warm and available. Human milk arrives at body temperature. That may sound trivial, but in a cold house it is convenient. No bottle needs heating. No liquid must be kept warm near a fire. There is no risk of preparing a feed that has cooled too much while someone tries to find a clean container. The food comes directly from a living source. Warm, fresh, ready. Medieval infant feeding technology is therefore remarkably portable. You need one baby, one lactating woman, and preferably somewhere to sit. The infant nurses again. You notice how still the baby becomes. Hands that were clenched begin to relax. The body presses close, breathing slows, the mother's arm curves around the child. Even if the main purpose is feeding, physical warmth naturally accompanies the process. This is especially important at night. A baby waking for milk means the household must respond during the coldest hours. The fire may be low, the floor may feel viciously cold. The room has lost much of its daytime warmth, yet feeding brings the newborn back into the warmest immediate environment available, against a person. The mother may pull clothing around both of them. She may nurse without fully exposing herself or the infant to the room. Practicality encourages speed. Nobody wants to undress extensively in January. Even modesty learns to cooperate with weather. You hear the baby swallow, a small sound. Pause. Another swallow. The mother shifts slightly. Her own nutrition now enters the picture. Producing milk costs energy. A nursing woman needs enough food and fluid to sustain herself. Medieval diets vary dramatically by class, region, season, religious fasting rules, harvest quality, and household wealth. In good times, bread, grains, legumes, dairy products, vegetables, fish, meat where available, ale, and other foods provide energy. In bad times, shortages strike. A poorly nourished mother may struggle. The infant's warmth is therefore connected to the wider food system. Harvests, markets, livestock, weather, household stores. Even political disruption can eventually reach the cradle through the mother's diet. A newborn appears to live in a tiny world. In reality, the baby depends on an enormous network. Historians still argue whether medieval medical advice about nursing schedules had much influence on ordinary families, because surviving texts sometimes recommend structured feeding practices, while real newborn care is likely much more flexible. A physician can suggest an ideal interval between feeds. The baby has not read the physician. The baby cries when hungry. That is often the more persuasive authority. Caregivers respond according to necessity. Some may attempt schedules. Others feed whenever the child demands. Custom differs. The infant's health differs. The mother's milk supply differs. Every household develops its own rhythm. You notice that feeding is also used for soothing. A frightened or restless baby may nurse even when hunger is not severe. Sucking itself can calm. Calm has practical value. A quiet baby moves less wildly. The child settles into a protected position. Breathing becomes regular. Everyone else receives a brief gift of silence for approximately 11 minutes. Then the newborn remembers another grievance. Burping and digestion create more opportunities for handling. The baby may be lifted upright, held against a shoulder, patted gently. The caregiver checks the child again. Cold hands can be covered, a loosened cap can be repositioned. The infant never remains an ignored bundle for long when feeding is frequent. This constant attention is exhausting. It is also protective. You feel the fatigue in the room. The mother's shoulders ache. Her eyes close for a moment. She has already been awakened several times. There is no electric light to switch on, only dim flame or darkness. No clock announces how long the baby has been feeding. Time is measured by sensation, the strength of the suck, the heaviness of the infant, the fading fire, the first hint of morning beyond the shutters. Still, she keeps the child close until feeding slows. The baby's body now feels warmer, not because milk is magical, because food gives the body energy, and the act of feeding brings the infant into sustained contact with warmth at the same time. Two problems are solved together: hunger, cold. Neither stays solved for very long. That is newborn life. The child finally releases the breast. The mouth relaxes. A tiny bubble of milk rests at one corner of the lips. The caregiver wipes it away. She keeps the infant upright for a little while, then settles the small body into a protected sleeping place. The newborn has consumed almost nothing by adult standards, yet for that tiny body, the meal is enough to fuel another stretch of breathing, growing, moving and producing heat. The room remains cold, the night remains long, but inside the infant, food is already becoming warmth. You sit near a woman whose hands move with the confidence of someone who has seen many babies arrive into cold rooms. She does not need to announce that she is experienced. You can tell. She notices things quickly. The way the infant breathes, the colour around the lips, whether the cry sounds strong, whether the tiny feet feel cool, whether damp cloth has been left in place too long, whether somebody has opened the door and allowed a ribbon of winter air to slide directly across the room. She's the sort of person who can detect a draft from 3 villages away. In many medieval communities, childbirth knowledge belongs largely to women. Experienced female relatives, neighbours, nurses, and midwives gather around labouring mothers. Their exact roles vary by place and century, and formal regulation becomes more common in some towns and regions as the medieval period develops. But practical knowledge often moves person to person. One woman learns by watching another. Then she uses those habits at the next birth. Years pass. She becomes the older woman everyone calls when labour begins at an inconvenient hour. Naturally, labour prefers inconvenient hours. Apparently medieval babies also enjoy arriving when everyone else has just gone to sleep. You watch her prepare the room. Her first concern is not decoration. Nobody is selecting curtains that complement the cradle. She is looking at air. Where does it enter? A shutter rattles slightly. A crack near the door leaks cold. She reaches for cloth and adjusts the opening. Not enough to seal the room completely. Enough to reduce the direct stream of chilly air. This distinction matters. Medieval people often think of moving air with suspicion, especially when someone is sick, weak, recovering from childbirth, or newly born. Drafts are uncomfortable in any case, but medical traditions can give them additional significance. Cold air may be blamed for disturbing the body, allowing illness to enter, or upsetting the balance of internal qualities. The details vary according to local belief and medical theory. The practical result is straightforward. Keep the newborn out of the draft. You move across the room and immediately feel why. The air near the doorway is sharper, a few feet away. Behind a hanging cloth, the movement softens. The temperature difference may be modest, but the sensation changes considerably. A midwife does not need a scientific instrument to identify the better spot. Her own skin tells her. She places the infant where the air feels stiller. This skill of judging by touch appears constantly. You notice her hand move to the child's neck, then the chest, then a foot. Adults sometimes make the mistake of judging a baby by fingers and toes alone, because extremities can feel cool even when the core remains comfortable. An experienced caregiver learns to gather several signs instead of trusting one. Is the baby alert? Does the torso feel warm? Is the breathing steady? Is the child feeding? Is the skin unusually pale or flushed? These observations form a practical diagnostic language. Nobody writes down a number. The body gives clues. A mainstream historical fact lies behind this scene. Medieval midwives and female birth attendants often provide much of the hands-on care surrounding labour, delivery, and the immediate treatment of the newborn, particularly in ordinary households. Physicians may become involved in difficult-to-treat births or serious complications, but routine childbirth is commonly managed within female networks. That gives experienced women enormous practical authority. They know which cloth is safest to use, which corner of the room is least drafty, how much warmth feels comfortable, when the newborn seems unusually quiet, when something is wrong enough to call for additional help. Their expertise is not modern medicine, it is accumulated observation. You see that clearly when she tests a piece of warmed cloth. She does not place it immediately against the baby. First, she touches it to her wrist, then her cheek. Too warm. She waits. Tests again. Now it feels gentle. Only then does she use it. This is a simple winter trick. Warm fabric can prevent the shock of wrapping a newborn in cloth that has been sitting in a chilly room. The goal is not to heat the baby aggressively. It is to avoid taking a warm infant and surrounding it with cold material. You understand this the moment you imagine putting on a shirt left overnight beside a stone wall. Medieval winter has many small cruelties. Cold clothing is one of the quieter ones. So cloth is sometimes aired or warmed near household heat, not burned, not scorched, not turned into a tiny oven, just warmed enough to feel pleasant. The experienced attendant is cautious because fire and newborns are an unforgiving combination. She keeps the material moving, checks it repeatedly, never assumes. Human touch remains the thermometer. You see another habit. She rubs the baby gently. Not hard, not dramatically. A soft rubbing of the limbs and back can dry the skin and encourage movement. Dryness matters because moisture cools quickly. A newborn emerging from birth is wet, and that moisture can draw warmth away from the body. Modern medicine explains evaporation in precise language. The woman beside you understands something simpler. Wet baby gets cold. Dry baby is easier to warm. This observation requires no university. It requires one winter. She works steadily. Moisture is removed. Fresh cloth appears. The infant is not left exposed longer than necessary. Every action has a rhythm. Open, check, clean, dry, cover. You begin to see that speed itself can preserve warmth. An inexperienced person might unwrap everything, search around for the next cloth, argue with somebody about where it was placed, then discover the baby has been lying uncovered the entire time. An experienced attendant prepares first. She puts supplies within reach. That is a tiny difference with large practical value. The baby spends less time exposed. A quirky tidbit emerges from the world of childbirth customs. In some medieval communities, childbirth rooms are deliberately made darker, quieter, or more enclosed than ordinary living spaces. Curtains, shutters, and hangings can create a secluded environment around the labouring woman. Part of this may be about privacy. Part may reflect beliefs about protecting mother and child. Part may simply make a cold, stressful room feel more controlled. You sit in the dimness and understand the appeal. Outside, people continue working. Inside, voices stay low. The space feels smaller, contained, almost like the household has folded itself around the birth. Of course, medieval medical advice can become much stranger. Writers recommend herbs, oils, baths, prayers, charms, special foods, and carefully timed actions for mothers and infants. Some suggestions are sensible, some are difficult to evaluate, some are thoroughly imaginative. A baby might be exposed to a mixture of practical nursing and beliefs that make a modern paediatrician raise both eyebrows. The people using these methods do not divide the world neatly into medicine, religion, custom, and superstition. Those categories overlap. A prayer may accompany a practical treatment. An herb may be used because it smells pleasant, and because someone believes it has protective qualities. A warm bath may be soothing and medically meaningful at the same time. You watch an older woman discuss whether the infant should be bathed. Bathing a newborn in cold conditions requires care. Water must be warmed. The room must be protected. The child must be dried quickly. Too much exposure risks chilling, so washing can be selective rather than elaborate. A cloth may clean one area at a time. The baby can remain mostly covered. Warm water is used sparingly. Efficiency matters. There is no luxurious bathroom where steam fills the air and towels emerge from heated rail. There is a basin, a jug, a fire. Several people trying not to spill anything, and one newborn who has already decided the entire arrangement is unacceptable. The crying starts. The experienced woman barely reacts. She has heard worse. She cleans the child quickly, dries the skin, and restores warmth. The crying stops almost as abruptly as it began. You suspect the baby merely wanted its objection formally recorded. Midwives also pay attention to the mother. That matters for the infant because a weakened or chilled mother may struggle to feed and care for the child. After labour, the woman needs rest, warmth, food, and protection. So medieval traditions encourage a period of confinement in which the new mother remains indoors and limits ordinary activity. The duration and meaning vary greatly. Religion, class, local custom, and household necessity all shape the practice. A wealthy woman can remain secluded longer because servants perform daily tasks. A poor woman may have far less opportunity. Still, even modest households may try to shield a mother from unnecessary cold immediately following childbirth. A warm mother is better able to keep a newborn warm. The two conditions are connected. You watch the attendant rearrange cushions behind her. A drink is brought. Something warm to eat may appear if the household can provide it. Nobody treats the mother as separate from infant care. Her recovery affects the baby directly. This is one of the quieter truths of pre-modern childbirth. The newborn survival depends heavily on the condition of the woman feeding and holding it. Historians still argue whether surviving midwifery instructions accurately reflect the practices of ordinary rural birth attendants, since many written texts come from educated authors, urban authorities, or later compilations rather than the women whose daily expertise leaves few records. That gap matters. The midwife in a manuscript may follow one set of rules. The midwife in a village may follow another. Or perhaps they overlap more than historians can prove. Experience travels without leaving much paperwork. A woman learns that one position keeps a baby away from drafts. She tells her daughter. Her daughter tells a neighbour. Nobody writes anything down. 5 generations later, the technique still exists. Then a historian arrives centuries afterward and wishes everyone had kept better notes. The household, inconsiderately, has not. You continue watching. The experienced attendant moves around the room with an eye for small dangers. A wet cloth lies too close to the baby. Removed. The door opens. Closed. A younger helper brings fabric that feels too cold. Warmed first. The infant seems sleepy. Checked. A cap sits awkwardly. Adjusted. None of these actions seems dramatic. Together, they create safety. That is the nature of practical care. Survival often depends less on one brilliant technique than on 20 ordinary decisions made correctly. You notice how much of her knowledge is sensory. She listens, touches, smells, looks. The cry changes. She hears it. The skin changes colour. She sees it. A cloth feels damp. She notices. The room cools. She feels it on her own arms. Medieval caregivers live close to physical conditions because there are fewer barriers between the body and the environment. Modern life gives you displays and alerts. Here, the person becomes the display. A good attendant learns to notice quickly. Another woman enters and disagrees about where to place the baby. For a moment, you glimpse the timeless politics of family expertise. One says the corner is too cold. The other says it is too close to the heat. Both speak with absolute confidence. The newborn contributes by sneezing once. This is immediately interpreted as evidence by both sides. Human civilization continues. Eventually, the cradle moves only slightly. A compromise is reached. The baby remains calm. That is enough. You sense that the real skill does not lie in rigid rules. It lies in adjustment. Weather changes. Fuel changes. The mother's strength changes. The baby's condition changes. The room changes throughout the day, so experienced caregivers respond continuously. Warmer cloth, less cloth. Move the cradle. Close the shutter. Open the door briefly. Dry the bedding. Hold the child. Check again. Nothing remains fixed because medieval winter does not remain fixed either. The older woman settles onto a stool. For the first time, her hands rest. The baby sleeps nearby. The air no longer moves sharply across the room. Cloths feel dry. The mother looks tired but comfortable. No single magical trick has defeated the cold. Instead, a collection of small judgments has narrowed the cold's opportunities. Touch, dryness, placement, timing, attention. The practical wisdom of people who know that newborn warmth is not something you arrange once. It is something you keep noticing. You wake to a room that feels colder than it should. The fire has faded. The air near the floor bites at your ankles. A pale layer of frost sits outside the shutter, and the household moves more slowly than usual, conserving effort while someone tries to coax life back into the hearth. The newborn is quiet. Too quiet. That silence immediately changes the mood. A crying baby can exhaust everyone in a household, but a baby who suddenly stops crying when expected to protest can be more frightening. A caregiver touches the child. The skin feels cool. The little body does not move with its usual energy. You see several people react at once. Someone adds fuel to the fire. Someone checks the wrapping. Someone lifts the infant. Another woman begins speaking quickly, giving instructions. This is the point where medieval ingenuity meets its limits. Warmth can be preserved, cold can be reduced, a baby can be held, wrapped, fed, sheltered, and watched carefully. But there are winters when all of that is not enough. Poverty makes the cold sharper. A household with money can buy more fuel. A household with stored wood can keep a fire burning longer. A family with several wool coverings can add another layer. A poor family may have one worn cloak, a little straw, and a woodpile that looks alarmingly philosophical about the meaning of emptiness. You step outside and see why. Fuel takes labour. Wood must be cut or collected. In some places, access to forests is controlled. Peasants may have customary rights to gather fallen branches, turf, or other materials, but those rights vary and can be restricted. In towns, fuel may need to be purchased. Prices rise. Supplies become difficult. A long cold spell turns warmth into arithmetic. How much wood remains? How many nights? How much must be saved for cooking? Which room should be used? You notice that nobody heats an entire building simply because they would prefer to. They heat the occupied part. Doors are closed. People cluster. Unused spaces become colder. The household contracts inward like an animal curling against winter. The newborn stays in the warmest available pocket. But available is the important word. Sometimes the warmest pocket is still cold. A mainstream historical fact presses heavily on this scene. Infant mortality in medieval Europe is extremely high by modern standards, with disease, premature birth, difficult delivery, poor nutrition, infection, and environmental exposure all contributing to the danger. Cold is rarely the only threat. That makes the problem more complicated. A healthy, full-term infant may withstand a cold house better than a premature child. A baby born early has less body fat. The limbs may be thin. The cry may be weak. Feeding can be difficult. Every disadvantage compounds another. You look at a tiny infant who seems almost too small for the cloth around it. The caregivers understand that the child is fragile even if they do not know the modern biology behind prematurity. They see the evidence. The baby tires quickly. The suck is weaker. The body cools faster. The child sleeps through moments when a stronger infant might wake and demand attention. A woman rubs the feet gently. Another tries to encourage feeding. They work with what they have. No incubator, no oxygen support, no neonatal intensive care, no machine monitoring heartbeat and temperature every second. Only eyes, hands, experience, hope. The gap between medieval care and modern medicine becomes painfully clear. You can admire household knowledge without pretending it solves everything. A warm cradle cannot cure infection. An extra wool layer cannot reverse a severe birth injury. A skilled midwife cannot always save a premature infant with breathing problems. Families live with uncertainty that modern listeners rarely have to imagine in the same way. The first weeks of life are dangerous. Everyone knows it. Not statistically. Personally. A woman remembers a sibling who died in infancy. A grandmother has buried children. A neighbour has lost twins. These are not distant stories. They sit inside the memory of the community. That knowledge changes the emotional atmosphere around a newborn. People can be deeply attached while also knowing that survival is not guaranteed. You hear prayers spoken quietly. Religion enters naturally at moments where practical options narrow. A child may be baptized quickly if death seems possible. In medieval Christian society, baptism has enormous spiritual importance, and concern over an unbaptized infant can create urgency around a weak newborn. In emergencies, people may seek baptism as soon as possible. Warmth, medicine, and religion stand beside one another. Nobody feels a need to choose only one. You can warm the baby and pray at the same time. Human beings are efficient that way. The household grows more tense when the infant refuses to feed. Nutrition and warmth are closely linked. A baby who cannot take in enough milk loses strength. A weaker baby moves less. Less movement and poor energy intake make maintaining body temperature harder. The adults respond by trying again. The infant is lifted. The mouth is guided. A small amount of milk is taken. Then the baby stops. Everyone waits. There is no percentage display showing feeding success. No digital scale records each gram. Caregivers judge from tiny signs. Swallowing. Wakefulness. Colour. Urination. Crying. The uncertainty is exhausting. You start to understand why older women with years of experience are valued so highly. They have seen patterns. They know which baby seems merely sleepy and which one worries them. Their judgments are imperfect, but without instruments, judgment is all the household possesses. Disease makes winter even harder. Respiratory illness spreads easily in crowded rooms. Smoke irritates lungs. Dampness encourages discomfort. Poor ventilation traps stale air while open doors bring cold. The family lives inside constant compromise. If too many people share a small warm space, illness can pass between them more easily. If people spread apart, they lose shared warmth. There is no perfect solution. The medieval household specializes in choosing between inconveniences and occasionally between dangers. A quirky tidbit emerges from this world of winter survival. Some households sleep with livestock nearby or within an attached structure, particularly in rural areas, and while people do not deliberately use cows as central heating units, animals do produce heat that can slightly change the temperature of a shared building. You imagine explaining this to a modern real estate agent. Open concept living, natural heating, strong agricultural aroma, excellent cow access. The animals also bring disadvantages: smell, noise, dirt, parasites. The possibility that a goat has opinions about your bedding. Still, medieval homes are designed around necessity rather than lifestyle branding. Warmth can come from strange combinations of people, animals, fuel, architecture, and accumulated material. Dampness remains a persistent enemy. You touch a wall and feel moisture. A house built in a wet landscape may never feel fully dry during winter. Cloth takes longer to dry. Straw bedding can become clammy. Wood burns poorly if damp. Cold and moisture work together, making everything feel worse. A newborn placed in damp material loses warmth faster, so caregivers keep checking. Dry cloth becomes precious. A sunny day, even a cold one, may offer a chance to air bedding. Wind can help dry material outdoors, but leave it too long and it returns icy. Domestic life becomes a constant game of timing. You cannot simply purchase another dozen clean sets. You use what can be washed, dried, warmed, and reused. Food shortages add another layer. A poor harvest does not reach the baby as an abstract economic event. It reaches through the mother. If food becomes scarce, adults eat less. A nursing mother may be exhausted, underfed, or ill. Milk supply can suffer. The child becomes more vulnerable. A cold winter following a bad harvest is therefore more dangerous than temperature alone suggests. Weather affects crops. Crops affect food. Food affects strength. Strength affects care. Everything connects. You stand in a household where one sack of grain influences an infant sleeping several feet away. Medieval survival is rarely about a single cause. This is why historians must be careful when reading old burial records or accounts of child death. A baby dies during winter. Was cold responsible? Perhaps partly. But maybe the child was premature. Maybe the mother was malnourished. Maybe respiratory disease was spreading. Maybe the home was damp. Maybe feeding failed. Maybe several problems arrived together. Historians still argue whether the seasonal patterns in medieval infant death can be cleanly separated into causes such as cold exposure, infection, malnutrition, and birth complications, because the surviving evidence is often incomplete and the risks overlap. You feel that uncertainty inside the room. The adults do not know either. They know only that the child is weak. They respond with familiar measures: warmth, milk, dryness, quiet, prayer, watchfulness. The baby stirs eventually. A small sound escapes. Not strong, but present. Someone relaxes slightly. The caregiver keeps the child close and waits for another sign. A few minutes later, the infant moves one hand. That tiny motion feels disproportionately important. You realize how low the threshold for hope becomes. A stronger cry, a successful feeding, warmer skin. Each is a victory. Medieval families can experience intense joy in these small improvements because the alternative is close enough to imagine. There is another inequality here. Wealth buys resilience. A noble household can summon physicians. It can maintain fires in more than one room. Servants fetch fuel. Storage rooms hold linen. Food supplies are larger. A wet nurse may be available if the mother cannot feed. But money still cannot guarantee survival. Premature infants die in castles. Infections enter rich chambers. Medical knowledge has limits no amount of silver can erase. A wealthy family merely has more options before reaching those limits. Poor families reach them sooner. That distinction is cruel. You watch a father count pieces of firewood. There are not enough for careless burning. He chooses smaller pieces. The fire grows modestly. The room warms only slightly. Nobody complains. The warmth is directed toward the people who need it most. Adults keep their cloaks on. Older children move around to stay warm. The newborn gets the sheltered position. Scarcity creates priorities. You notice something almost tender in this arrangement. The household does not possess enough comfort for everyone, so comfort is redistributed. The strongest tolerate more cold. The smallest receives more protection. Not always, not everywhere. Human beings are inconsistent, but often enough, the infant becomes the center of attention simply because vulnerability is obvious. The baby's face is barely larger than an adult palm. Its entire body seems to fit inside the space between two forearms. That scale changes everything. You understand why adults keep checking. A grown person can shiver, move, complain, fetch fuel, or find another place. The newborn can do none of these. Its survival depends on other people noticing first. The room finally grows a little warmer. Not warm, just less cold. The infant accepts a short feed. The cry returns, thin but irritated. For once, irritation is reassuring. Someone smiles and the baby's complaining again. Excellent! Management has never been so pleased to receive criticism. Outside, winter continues without sympathy. Inside, The household keeps working against it with limited tools and stubborn attention. There is no illusion that cold has been defeated. It has merely been held at a distance for another hour. For a fragile newborn, sometimes another hour is exactly what survival means. You stand in the middle of the household and finally notice that no single object is keeping the newborn warm. The entire home is doing it. The walls slow the wind, the shutters reduce drafts, the hearth changes the temperature of the occupied space. Clothing holds heat close to the body. A raised sleeping place separates the infant from colder surfaces. Dry padding keeps dampness away. Food provides energy. Human hands notice when something has gone wrong. Every small measure overlaps with another. The result is not a medieval equivalent of a modern heated nursery. It is something more improvised. The household itself becomes a protective shell. You can almost trace the layers outward from the newborn. Closest is the baby's own skin, then clothing and wrapping, then the sleeping place, then nearby people, then the warmer portion of the room, then shutters, walls, roof, and doors. Beyond all of that sits winter. Cold air presses against the building, searching constantly for gaps. Medieval architecture rarely defeats it completely. The goal is reduction. Slow the cold, block the draft, preserve the warmth already produced, keep vulnerable bodies inside the most protected spaces. This is the basic logic of winter survival. You watch a family reorganize the room as evening begins. Work that requires daylight stops. People move inward. A stool comes closer to the occupied area. A basket is shifted away from an outside wall. A hanging cloth is adjusted. Someone checks the door. Another person carries fuel inside so nobody has to search for it later in darkness. The newborn sleeps through the preparations with the confidence of someone who contributes nothing to the logistical operation. You admire that confidence. The infant has effectively hired an entire household without signing a contract. Architecture plays a larger role than it first appears. A house made from timber, wattle and daub, stone, brick, or combinations of materials behaves differently in winter. Thick walls can slow temperature changes, although stone can feel extremely cold when a building has not been warmed. Timber walls may provide different insulation but still allow drafts where joints are poor. Wattle and daub can create surprisingly effective walls when maintained properly. That maintenance matters. Cracks develop, plaster falls away, roofs leak, doors warp. People repair these weaknesses because a small opening can become a persistent source of cold air. You see someone push material into a narrow gap near a frame. It is not elegant. It works. A mainstream historical fact sits within these ordinary repairs. Many medieval houses use combinations of timber framing, woven wattle, clay-based daub, stone, thatch, tiles, or wooden roofing depending on local resources and wealth. There is no single medieval house. A cottage in England does not function exactly like a stone dwelling in Italy. A Scandinavian farm does not face the same winter as a Mediterranean townhouse. Climate shapes domestic habits. So does available building material. In colder northern regions, winter preparation can become a major seasonal task. Fuel is stored, roofs are checked, openings are secured, food is preserved, livestock arrangements change. Families know winter is coming without receiving a dramatic weather notification on a glowing rectangle. The first freezing morning is not a surprise, it is a deadline. The baby simply makes the consequences more urgent. You notice that household routines change by season too. Activities that might happen outdoors in summer move inside during winter. More people spend more time in the occupied room. Spinning, mending, tool repair, food preparation, conversation, small crafts. The increase in bodies produces additional heat. A room containing 6 people feels different from an empty room. Not luxurious, but different. The newborn benefits indirectly from ordinary human presence. This is one of the most overlooked sources of historical warmth. People, Modern houses often heat empty spaces because a mechanical system maintains a chosen temperature. Medieval homes concentrate warmth around activity because warmth follows fire and bodies. If everyone leaves a room, it cools. If everyone gathers, it becomes more tolerable. You settle among the household and feel the gradual change. Someone tells a story. Someone works thread between their fingers. Someone else repairs a strap. The baby makes an occasional sleepy noise. A cup passes from one adult to another. The warmth here is partly physical and partly social. You cannot measure the second kind with a thermometer, but it influences survival anyway. People notice one another. Someone sees the infant's covering has slipped. Someone hears an unusual cry. Someone realizes fresh cloth is needed. Care is distributed among many eyes. A newborn kept completely apart from everyday household life would lose this constant observation. Here, the baby exists in the busiest human zone. That arrangement carries disadvantages too. Noise, smoke, disease exposure, accidental disturbance. An older sibling who believes whispering means shouting from slightly farther away. Nothing is perfect. The family chooses among trade-offs. Even household animals contribute to the strange ecology of warmth. A cat finds the most comfortable place available with supernatural accuracy. A dog curls near people. Livestock may occupy attached areas in some rural buildings. Their presence generates heat, but also moisture, smell, dirt, and insects. Medieval domestic space is rarely sanitized. It is managed. Clean enough, dry enough, warm enough. Those two words, enough, define much of ordinary life. You see them everywhere. Enough fuel to reach morning, enough food for nursing, enough dry cloth for the next change, enough protection against the draft, enough warmth to prevent the smallest body from becoming dangerously cold. People rarely possess infinite supplies. Care means allocating limited resources intelligently. A quirky tidbit appears when you look at medieval household entrances. Some buildings use simple textile hangings, internal partitions, or other barriers to reduce the blast of air entering when a door opens. You can think of it as a medieval airlock designed by someone whose materials are wood, cloth, and intense dislike of February. Even furniture placement helps. A chest against an outside wall creates another barrier. A bed enclosed by hangings forms a smaller climate. A bench can lift a basket away from the floor. Ordinary objects become part of environmental control simply because someone puts them in useful places. You begin to understand why there is no single answer to the question of how newborns remain warm. The answer is architectural, textile-based, nutritional, social, behavioral, economic, seasonal. Even religious beliefs can affect how people organize care. A household may pray for the child while simultaneously checking its bedding. Nobody experiences these actions as contradictory. Protection can be practical and spiritual at once. Church bells mark time in the distance. The sound travels faintly through the cold air. Inside, the newborn remains surrounded by an entire web of ordinary decisions. The baby does not know which of them matters most. Neither, perhaps, does the household. They simply repeat what seems to work. That repetition creates tradition. A mother remembers how her own mother handled infants. A grandmother corrects a younger woman. A neighbour offers a suggestion. A midwife brings habits learned across dozens of births. Households exchange knowledge through conversation more often than through books. This is especially important because literacy is limited and formal. Medical writing reaches only part of the population. Practical knowledge survives orally. It survives through imitation. Watch my hands. Put the baby here. Feel this cloth. Not that close to the draft. Check again later. Instructions this simple can carry generations of experience. Historians still argue whether historians sometimes underestimate this informal domestic knowledge because it leaves fewer written traces than elite medical theory. A physician's manuscript survives in a library. A grandmother's winter routine usually does not. The imbalance shapes what you can reconstruct. Written evidence favours institutions, authorities, and literate people. Daily household skill often vanishes with the people who practice it, yet traces remain in objects, where marks on furniture, textile fragments, building layouts, images, household accounts, legal records, religious writing, archaeological remains. Each fragment offers a small clue. You gather them mentally until the room becomes more visible. Not perfectly. History rarely gives you that luxury, but clearly enough to understand the pattern. Warmth is cumulative. One layer helps a little. A sheltered position helps a little. Dryness helps. Food helps. Human contact helps. A fire helps. Several people sharing a small occupied space help. Combined, those modest advantages may become the difference between discomfort and danger. The system also depends on constant labour. This is easy to romanticize from a warm modern bed. The fire looks picturesque. The wooden cradle looks charming. The wool looks rustic. Then you remember that someone cuts the fuel, someone hauls it, someone spins the yarn, someone washes the cloth, someone dries it, someone repairs the wool, someone gets up when the baby cries, someone feeds the infant while exhausted, someone cleans the sleeping place. Warmth is work, usually repetitive work, often women's work, often unpaid, almost always taken for granted. You watch a caregiver sit down at last. Her hands look rough. The baby's skin looks impossibly smooth beside them. That contrast tells its own story. The infant's comfort is built from adult labour. There is no automatic system humming invisibly in a utility room. Everything has a human cost. Even maintaining the shelter requires attention. Thatch deteriorates, daub cracks, textiles tear, fuel disappears, food stores decline, nothing stays finished. The medieval household exists in a constant state of repair. You can almost hear it complaining. Fix me, feed me, patch me, refill me. The building and the newborn have surprisingly similar management styles, yet this constant repair creates resilience. Families learn flexibility because conditions change often. If one method fails, another compensates. The fire burns low, so more people gather. A cloth becomes wet, so another is found. A draft appears, so furniture moves. Fuel becomes scarce, so the occupied area shrinks. Adaptation is not a special emergency skill. It is ordinary domestic life. You watch night settle over the building. The outer room grows darker first, corners disappear, then details fade. The inhabited centre remains visible by firelight. Faces catch orange colour. A wooden bowl gleams briefly. The newborn lies within the smallest protected space of all. No modern blanket covers the child in the form you expect. Instead, warmth arrives from several directions at once, from material beneath, from layers around, from human bodies nearby, from the air changed by the household fire, from the building that slows the wind, from food inside the infant's body, from the people who keep noticing. That last source may be the most important. Attention. A newborn cannot manage any part of the system. The child cannot move away from a cold wall, cannot dry wet fabric, cannot add fuel, cannot ask for food with words, cannot repair a shutter. Every defense against winter depends on somebody else recognizing a need. The household becomes the blanket because the household stays involved. You look toward the tiny face. The infant sleeps without knowing how much effort surrounds that sleep. Perhaps that is exactly how infancy should feel. The world handles the difficult parts. The baby simply breathes. Word count 609. The voices in the room begin to soften. Hands finish their tasks. The fire sinks lower, losing its bright edges and becoming a quiet red glow beneath ash. You no longer need to inspect every wall, every cloth, every careful choice. You can simply remain here for a little while. The newborn sleeps. The chest rises, falls, rises again. Outside, winter presses against the roof and shutters, but its presence feels farther away now. Inside, the household has become still. The small basket rests safely in its sheltered place. Fabric lies smooth. Air barely moves. Somebody nearby breathes slowly in sleep. Another person shifts once and settles again. You let the sounds blend together. Wood cooling. A faint ember cracking. Wind brushing the outer wall. The tiny rhythm of a sleeping child. Nothing needs to happen quickly anymore. There is no task waiting for you. No firewood to carry and no cloth to wash. No cold doorway to block. You're only watching the last warmth linger in a room built by ordinary hands. The infant knows nothing of centuries, customs, architecture, medicine, or survival. There is only this moment, warm enough, quiet enough, safe enough. Your own breathing can slow with the room. The shadows soften. The edges of furniture disappear. Even the winter outside seems less sharp. Turning into little more than a distant hush beyond the walls, the baby remains curled in its small protected world. The adults rest. The embers dim, and the old house, imperfect and drafty and patiently cared for, seems to hold everyone gently until morning. You can leave the room exactly like this. Still, warm, quiet. Nothing more is required.